Story 1. Just as my wife, Beverly, managed to utter, "Joshua, it's not what you think," I swiftly took hold of her paramour and escorted him out to my Hummer. That singular moment signaled the onset of a day inundated with unforeseen revelations, each one wielding the power to dramatically shift the trajectory of my life. And now I'm ready to share this tale. Despite being married to Beverly for a solid 18 years, I've always gone by Joshua. Together, we've raised our daughter Ruby, who is now 18, ensuring she never lacked anything. As she embarks on her journey into college, Beverly continues to oversee our household, while I remain dedicated to my work. Our story began when we were both 20 years old, and just 2 months into our relationship, we were taken aback by the news of Beverly's pregnancy. Even amidst my apprehension regarding the challenges that lay ahead, I found myself unexpectedly optimistic. Promptly, I proposed to Beverly, and we solemnly exchanged vows. Undoubtedly, these were trying times. With neither of us having received a formal education, Beverly assumed the responsibility of managing our household affairs. The situation took a turn for the worse upon Ruby's arrival, as I lost my job, leaving us with no means to meet our financial obligations. Taking out a loan became our sole recourse. Our living conditions during this tumultuous period were far from ideal. We were confined to a cramped 15-square-meter space within my parents' home. We faced an uncertain future. By the time Ruby turned 4, my employment situation had improved, granting us a more stable financial footing. This positive turn of events allowed us to bid farewell to my parents' residence and secure a modest but cozy house on the outskirts of town. Juggling 2 jobs became my routine, with extensive hours dedicated to my primary occupation during the day and evenings devoted to supplementary work, all in pursuit of ensuring Ruby's upbringing was enriched. Despite the obstacles that beset us during this arduous period, we persevered. I poured my energy into my daytime employment and remained dedicated to my evening endeavors. Ultimately, we emerged triumphant from this undoubtedly challenging phase. We managed to clear all our debts, procure our inaugural abode, and 2 years back, I fulfilled my aspiration of acquiring a Hummer, a long-held desire for which we had diligently saved. Additionally, we've earmarked funds for Ruby's college expenses. I attained professional triumphs that once seemed unattainable, sans a formal education. Yet, through dedication and proactive measures, I earned the respect and backing of my superiors, ultimately ascending to a managerial role. Presently, our family thrives, buoyed by my earnings. Though we didn't lead an extravagant lifestyle, we ensured the essentials, with the paramount concern being the well-being of my daughter, Ruby. The arrival of my daughter's first boyfriend, Andrew, into our family triggered an unusual level of stress for her, despite always believing I was effectively guiding her. Although Andrew attended the same college as Ruby, I found myself harboring an inexplicable dislike for him the moment he entered our home. Though I couldn't articulate it at the time, I felt strongly that my daughter deserved better. I often pondered what qualities she saw in him. It wasn't until 3 months into their relationship that Ruby finally confessed to us about Andrew. She confided in Beverly, expressing her concern about my potential reaction, fearing my anger, and unfortunately, her fears were realized. I concealed my animosity towards Andrew, maintaining a facade of friendliness and sociability. I regularly engaged him in conversation, offering encouragement and posing inquiries, yet I sensed his attempts to connect with someone else. Nevertheless, whenever he entered our home, I made it a priority to engage Ruby in conversation. One such exchange occurred the day before the pivotal event. As soon as I opened the door, Ruby expressed her reluctance to discuss the topic at hand. She said, "Dad, I'd rather not delve into this." I replied, "Ruby, Andrew is just an ordinary guy. Our perspectives may differ, so I'm not seeking your viewpoint. I'm not criticizing you. I just struggle to grasp what you find appealing about him. Even though academic success could significantly improve his prospects, he currently lacks employment and seems to perform poorly in his studies," I remarked. Ruby retorted, "Dad, did you ever need a reason to love Mom? Mom believed in me, and I felt assured. I'm not implying you didn't. Back then, I was motivated, but unfortunately, I don't see the same drive in Andrew. It's because you had to step up when Mom got pregnant with me. And here you are, talking about Andrew when you don't even have a formal education. We've only been together for 4 months. I'm not saying I plan to spend my life with him. Maybe I'll end things in a few days. But for now, everything about him suits me. Before I could say anything more, Ruby cut me off, saying, "Enough, Dad, drop the subject. I'm over it. Could I just ask one final question?" Ruby said, "All right, but I reserve the right not to respond if I dislike it." "Excellent. Has there been any communication between you and Andrew?" I inquired. "Indeed, and more than once." I was surprised by Ruby's frank statement. "I make decisions about my body because I'm 18 years old. When did this happen? Why didn't you let us know?" This is the second question already. "Dad, that's enough. We only agreed on one issue. And anyhow, Mom already knows." "Good night. I have to study for my exams," Ruby declared, and I reciprocated her well wishes and left with a really bad feeling, desperate to find out. I went straight to Beverly. As I entered our bedroom, I saw Beverly lying on the bed, deeply absorbed in a book. I decided to tell her the news without giving away my motives. "Honey, guess what I just learned?" I said. "What's up, dear?" She asked cheerfully. "I mentioned something about our daughter having a romantic involvement with a guy named James or Andrew, if I remember correctly." My spouse affirmed her awareness of the situation. Ruby had briefed her about it, but she had urged me to keep it quiet. However, Ruby ended up coming clean herself. At that moment, I completely lost track of my original thoughts. Beverly's response irked me. I couldn't fathom why she was standing up for Andrew. Our disagreement escalated into an argument, and we retired to bed in silence, turning our backs on each other. I couldn't understand why my wife saw Andrew in a positive light, contrary to my perspective. Her support for him grew stronger as he started spending more nights at our place. Unfortunately, Ruby began inviting him over not just for short visits, but for overnight stays, sharing her room with him. I assumed Beverly was defending Andrew and allowing him to stay overnight out of sympathy. Andrew had endured a challenging upbringing in foster care, with less than ideal living conditions. While I empathize with Andrew for his tough life and the loss of his parents at a young age, I still harbored doubts about him. When I arrived home one evening after midnight about 11 o'clock, I saw Andrew's sneakers at the entrance, which was out of the ordinary for that time of day. After I got home from work, which was generally after 8 o'clock p.m., I had a strict rule that nobody from outside the house may be in. Andrew ought to have departed by now, or at least be in the process of doing so, as it was well beyond that hour. I was shocked to learn that Beverly had invited Andrew to stay without asking. Because of Andrew's presence, it felt like we were fighting nearly every day after that episode. I tried talking to Beverly and my daughter, but I couldn't seem to get any sleep. It appeared as though my family was putting a stranger ahead of me and disregarded my worries. There was food every time I returned home, but on the occasions that Andrew slept over, there would usually be leftovers because he was a picky eater. I was growing increasingly irritated by these episodes. After learning that my daughter was seeing Andrew a month earlier, he had already established himself as a housemate, sharing meals and making love to her. I went to work the following day feeling depressed following my altercation with Beverly and Ruby. Beverly was taking care of housekeeping as Ruby studied for an exam. I was thinking on the way to work that my wife and children may never forgive me if I kicked Andrew out right now. I never managed to resolve my question, but the work week got off to a good start. I completed all the tasks I had scheduled for the morning and prepared to present a new project at a meeting. My boss, Richard, reminded me, "Joshua, you haven't forgotten about our meeting in an hour and a half, have you? Is everything set?" I assured him, "Yes, sir, I'm completely prepared." However, it suddenly struck me that I had left all the necessary documents at home. How could I have overlooked them? I rushed to my assistant, urgently asking her to cover for me, as I needed to leave for around 30 minutes. She nodded in agreement, assuring me, "Absolutely, Mr. Joshua, I'll handle it." Hastening to my car, I set off for home. Along the way, I tried to reach Beverly, hoping she could swiftly retrieve the documents from the living room and deliver them to me. However, she failed to answer her phone. Considering that Ruby might already be home, I decided to give her a call next. "How insane can you go, Dad? You're phoning and interfering with me waiting for my turn." "I promised to call as soon as I finished the exam," she reprimanded, hanging up the phone. I accelerated beyond the speed limit, conscious that time was slipping away. The approval of this meeting promised an immediate bonus, a salary increase, and the prospect of career advancement, so I couldn't afford any slip UPS. Upon reaching home, I glanced at the clock. It showed 1:15 p.m. Seeing that the meeting was scheduled for 2:15 p.m., I muttered to myself. Darn it. I've only been driving for 30 minutes to get back home. I needed to enter the house swiftly and return to work. To my surprise, the front door was shut, an unusual sight as it's typically left open during the day, and I habitually avoided carrying keys to prevent misplacing them. The back entrance was also locked, adding to my frustration. I then headed to the kitchen window, where I heard loud music from the second floor, indicating Beverly was cleaning and enjoying some tunes. The window was partially open, tempting me to enter through it, but it posed a challenge. I had to stretch to reach the handle and maneuver my way inside. Luckily, I managed to do so without any mishaps. As I stepped in, I immediately noticed the unchanged state of the house since I left for work in the morning. Despite the mess, I decided to proceed upstairs while the music continued to blare. As I glanced around, I noticed Beverly's phone resting on the nightstand. It displayed 3 missed calls from me, with messages from Andrew below. However, the phone was locked, preventing me from accessing them, which sent a shiver down my spine. I couldn't shake off the unsettling feeling about why Andrew was contacting my wife and whether this was becoming a frequent occurrence. As I made my way to the second-floor corridor, these thoughts lingered in my mind. Initially, the loud music drowned out any other sounds, but as I ascended, distinct noises became audible. When I reached the second-floor corridor, the moans and rhythmic sounds blended with the music, with our bedroom door slightly ajar. Approaching the door cautiously, I immediately spotted Beverly, wearing her customary lace pants, the ones she usually wore on our anniversary. As I moved closer, the scene inside the room became clearer. Surveying the room apprehensively, I struggled to comprehend the situation unfolding before me. Behind them, I glimpsed my wife and a young man engaged in an intimate moment. At first, I didn't identify him as Andrew. They remained engrossed in their activities, oblivious to my presence. The emotions I experienced at that moment were indescribable. Without hesitation, I grabbed my phone and recorded a 30-second video as a precautionary measure. Then, moving silently, I approached them from behind. When I was within reach, I seized the man by the leg and forcefully flung him off the bed. As he landed on the ground, it took me a moment to recognize him as Andrew. He stood there momentarily, trying to comprehend the situation. Swiftly, I captured a photograph of his bewildered expression. At that moment, Beverly noticed my presence. I continued to pull Andrew across the floor by his leg. Joshua, it's not what you think, Beverly cried out in a panicked voice. The music abruptly ceased as I completed dragging the young man downstairs. Beverly rushed out of the room, crying, Andrew is not at fault. She pleaded, no, Andrew is innocent. It's all my fault. Let him go. However, I disregarded her pleas, leaving Andrew defenseless against someone weighing 110 kilograms. Ignoring Beverly, I forced open the front door as she, still in her robe, tried to block my path. Evading her, I made my way to the car, dragging Andrew along the floor. Leave or he'll truly get hurt right here, I warned Beverly as she tried to impede my progress. She fled. As I guided Andrew into the back seat of my Hummer, I instructed him firmly, don't move, got it? Andrew nodded in understanding. After I shut the door, I noticed my neighbor mowing his grass, his expression filled with shock and surprise. I reassured Anthony, saying, don't worry. It's a learning experience. Everything will be fine with the boy. After calling out to my neighbor, I was about to enter the car when my wife's voice rang out from inside the house. Joshua, if you leave now, I'll call the police and report Andrew's kidnapping. After observing that my wife had regained her composure, I approached Andrew and questioned him. Did I just kidnap you? Andrew promptly denied it, prompting me to repeat the question. Now tell my wife the same thing, that you were in my bedroom today. He complied, reassuring her that everything was fine, and we drove away. About 5 minutes into the drive, my supervisor called, followed by Beverly. Ignoring the notifications, I focused on the road ahead, leaving my work far behind. After a brief recovery from his shock, Andrew asked, Are you planning to kill me? Why? I have something more intriguing in mind, I replied. 40 minutes later, as we arrived at the college's main entrance, our daughter Ruby was wrapping up her exams. Andrew followed my instructions. Although he seemed eager to speak, I had to repeat my command firmly. Leave immediately. Step outside and stay put. It will only get worse if you move. Understand? Andrew nodded in understanding and cautiously opened the door, stepping onto the street. Quickly, I stepped back to observe from a distance. Andrew stood there trembling with fear, covering his lower body with his hands. Despite the circumstances, I couldn't help but admire him at that moment. He had the opportunity to run away or resist getting out of the car when he was involved with my wife, yet he complied with my instructions. Who was I to impose my will on him? It was somewhat amusing that he complied with my request. After approximately 3 minutes, a group of students gathered around Andrew, intrigued by the unusual scene. Some of them laughed and threw bits of paper at him, while others took photos. A few, like myself, simply observed the situation. Suddenly, Ruby appeared from the main entrance, her face devoid of a smile. It was probable that Beverly had already contacted her, painting me as a domineering father who had abducted her boyfriend. The irony was that Beverly's portrayal of me turned out to be true. She had indeed depicted me as a villain to Ruby. I hurried over to Ruby to prevent her from approaching Andrew. At that moment, Andrew began calling out to Ruby, attempting to get her attention. As I approached Ruby, she started moving away from me in the opposite direction. At the same time, Andrew tried to rush towards Ruby, but another young man intervened, knocking him to the ground. Someone had alerted the police about Andrew's distressed state near the educational institution. I pursued Ruby, shouting that I would clarify everything, but she hastened her pace, calling for assistance. Eventually, she began running, desperately seeking help. I realized it was futile. Upon returning to the car, I noticed a police car where Andrew was being held. A smirk crossed my face as I reactivated notifications on my phone. There was a message from Ruby, "Stay away from me." Beverly had called 6 times, and my boss had called a staggering 23 times. The situation was dire. Feeling disoriented, I sought refuge in a bar, where I stayed until morning. My evening began with beer and ended with whiskey. I struck up a conversation with some patrons at the bar and shared my story. Initially skeptical, they were genuinely shocked when I showed them the photos. The next morning, I made the responsible choice not to drive and called a taxi to take me to a hostel. I spent 2 days there, buying a pen and notebook and contemplating my next moves. I composed a brief message to my boss, explaining the situation. He seemed to understand and advised me to contact him once everything settled down. This prompted me to turn off my phone. On the second day, I formulated a plan, carefully weighing all potential risks. It was time to return home, with my main goal being to mend my relationship with my daughter. I knew she would initially resist, but I held on to the hope that she would eventually see things from my perspective. However, my journey home took an unexpected turn. Just 500 meters away, I was pulled over by the police and escorted to the station. To my surprise, Beverly had filed a report against me, claiming that I had forced Andrew to stand close to the college under duress, broken into the house during the day, and assaulted her. Ruby repeated the same charges, which startled me even more. I was taken aback by these allegations at first and sought legal counsel right away. I presented a thorough narrative of the actual occurrences that day, complete with pictures and video proof. I made it clear that Andrew had voluntarily joined us, and my neighbor, who happened to be watering his grass at the moment, affirmed this. He stated in his testimony that he did not witness any resistance from Andrew or hear any threats. He also said that I looked composed and that he had never noticed anything fishy. My statement was accepted, but Andrew was taken into custody. Later on, after giving contradictory testimony, Beverly and Ruby showed up there accompanied by their attorney. Ruby turned away from me, and Beverly sent me a cold glare. It hurt so much to watch her act like this toward me. I was told by the attorney that Ruby had not known at first that Beverly and Andrew were related, but that she would learn this information during questioning. As my attorney had warned, Ruby's perspective took a sharp turn. In the corridor, she gave me a hard embrace and apologized. She disclosed that her mother had presented an entirely different image, and that Ruby had originally consented to give a fake statement as retaliation out of rage. However, her stance quickly changed upon seeing the incriminating photos. I harbored no ill will towards Ruby. I was simply relieved that she believed me. Several months later, our divorce was finalized in court, and we sold the house, dividing the proceeds. Beverly was required to compensate me significantly for her false accusations. Andrew was released, but he faced expulsion from college and had to leave due to the ridicule he endured when the truth came out. The hearings were rescheduled by my kind supervisor, and I improved my job and was rewarded with a bonus, double pay, and a promotion that I earned. I opted for a more basic automobile and upgraded to a smaller residence. Although Beverly went to live with her parents and looked for work to meet her compensation requirements, Ruby made the decision to stay in my life until she finished her college education. I totally agreed with Ruby's explanation that she had no wish to speak with Beverly. All in all, everything started to get back to normal. In retrospect, I want everyone hearing this to know that unforeseen circumstances do happen in life and that one needs to be ready to make tough choices. And did I feel any sorrow for what happened? Yes, for a time, but I now see that this is a fantastic chance for a new beginning. I prioritize my kid, spend more time with Jim, and make more time for myself. I can say with confidence that things are going well for me, and I hope that you may learn something significant from my tale. I hope everyone has the best of luck since I wouldn't want this on anyone. Intro story 2. Okay, that was an entertaining story. Now, let's switch gears and explore another intriguing tale. Stay tuned and let's get started. Story 2. Let's get started by introducing the main characters in this story. Me, my ex-wife Pepper, our main target for revenge, her boyfriend Steve, Steve's ex-wife Maria, my partner in the revenge plan, my daughter Sarah, and my friend Jason, who helped me with the revenge scheme. Now that we've covered the cast, let's delve into some background details. Pepper and I had a turbulent marriage. Looking back, I realized I was deeply in love with her, but it became evident that she was more interested in the financial stability and convenience I provided. Before we got married, she already had a son named Bob, who had a long-standing issue with pills, and I had another son from a previous relationship. During our marriage, Sarah was born. I made sincere efforts to salvage our relationship, but eventually the strain became too much. We made the decision to separate, and due to the nature of my job, which required occasional travel, as well as my custody of my son, I moved back to my hometown in a different state. This move allowed my parents to assist me, and I kept an apartment in the town where Pepper and Sarah lived to maintain a strong connection with my daughter. During this time, I sought the help of my best friend Jason, who happens to be a lawyer, to draft a child support agreement between Pepper and me. It's important to clarify that this agreement solely addressed child support and did not cover custody arrangements, visitation schedules, or any other related matters. Consequently, for about a year, our arrangement was as follows. I spent a month with Sarah while my parents looked after my other son, and then I dedicated a month to him. About a year later, I found it financially challenging to sustain two households, and Pepper expressed her desire to move back to her hometown, which was in a different state but closer to my location. Consequently, I relinquished the apartment, and she made the move. We continued with this revised arrangement for a couple more years, and Pepper and I maintained an amicable relationship, even attempting to reconcile our romance on several occasions. However, despite my enduring affection for her, we couldn't reach a consensus on critical matters such as our choice of residence. I compelled myself to move forward, prompting me to embark on new dating experiences. In contrast, Pepper started dating almost immediately after my departure. We stuck to this new arrangement for a couple more years, and Pepper and I managed to stay on good terms, even trying to patch things up romantically a few times. But despite my feelings for her, we couldn't see eye to eye on big decisions like where to live. So I decided to move on and started dating again. Meanwhile, Pepper wasted no time in getting back into the dating scene herself. Hearing about her outings with Steve stung, especially when they got really close. Looking back, I can't help but wonder if that was her intention all along. However, despite my efforts to be a supportive friend and a trusted confidant, I was suddenly informed that she and Steve had ended their relationship after 6 months of dating. Suddenly, she realized that she was deeply in love with me. Since the beginning of the summer, she packed her bags and traveled to my state with the intention of spending the summer with me and assessing whether they would enjoy being here or not. I must admit, we had a wonderful summer together. All the kids got along well, and even Bob seemed to enjoy himself here. Consequently, Pepper officially announced that we were back together and that they would move in with me. We proceeded to enroll my daughter in school, and she even joined a PE cheerleading team over the summer, forming some great friendships and enjoying her time. However, a challenging situation arose. Pepper still had an apartment filled with her belongings and possessions. I offered to use my truck and assist her in moving everything, but she insisted that she and Bob could manage it themselves. So they embarked on the task of packing and finding their way to their new residence. As you can imagine, events took an unexpected turn. After being at home for only 3 days, Pepper made a shocking revelation. She firmly stated that she would not be moving under any circumstances, and that she and Steve loved each other very much and planned to live together. To say I was devastated falls short of capturing the intensity of my emotions. I couldn't understand why she put me through this ordeal. What made matters worse was that she let me convey this heartbreaking news to Sarah. When I broke the news to her, the pained look on her face turned my initial pain into anger. Sarah finally broke down and started begging to stay with me, and in the process, she started revealing everything. She shared in detail about her mother leaving with Steve for days, leaving Bob in charge. Sarah had to learn to cook for herself by the time she was 8 years old. This was because Bob would spend the family's money on drugs and was almost always high. If Bob wasn't the one in charge, Pepper would entrust her niece. Sarah also recounted her first meeting with Steve, who visited their house without saying hello, and then he and her mother disappeared into the bedroom, engaging in loud intimacy. Sarah was outside the door crying her eyes out, but they paid no attention to her and continued. Through this traumatic experience, my 8-year-old daughter became aware of that intimacy, and even after 7 years, she is still receiving counseling to recover from these traumatic incidents. At this point in the story, my initial anger escalated into full-blown rage. I quickly informed Pepper that there was absolutely no way Sarah would return to that situation, and I was fully prepared to fiercely defend my daughter in response. Pepper took immediate action and scheduled an emergency hearing with the intention of forcing Sarah to return. I had to act swiftly, but I managed to secure legal representation and, fortunately, easily won the hearing, despite Pepper arriving late and citing her disability as an excuse to the judge. The judge agreed with me, stating that due to the lack of a custody agreement and the troubling allegations I had gathered, it was in Sarah's best interest to continue staying with me during this time. Winning this battle was a relief, but it was short-lived. Within an hour, my inbox was flooded with phishing emails and text messages. I also started receiving requests to reset passwords and multi-factor authentication codes from my bank, Facebook, Reddit, and other accounts. I strongly suspected that Steve was behind these malicious actions. Later that day, Jason called me with disturbing news. The email and phone systems on his law firm's website had both been hacked. He was obligated to report the incident to the court, which only added to my frustration. These two individuals had not only turned my life upside down, but also harmed my daughter and tainted my longtime friend's reputation. It was time for them to face the consequences, and I was determined to make sure they paid the ultimate price. I became consumed with the mission of gathering evidence against Steve and Pepper. My efforts paid off with Pepper. I found social media posts showing her frequenting bars and clubs, often returning home late. This correlated with Sarah's absences and tardiness at school. I also found photos of Pepper spending time with 2 unfamiliar children. Additionally, I found neighbors willing to testify that Sarah often asked them for food when she was left in the care of Bob or Pepper's niece, who had multiple felony convictions. Gathering evidence against Steve proved more challenging. He had taken additional security measures to protect his accounts, making it difficult for me to find any incriminating information. However, a stroke of luck came when I stumbled upon his LinkedIn profile. Among his connections was Maria, his ex-wife. I reached out to her, and we quickly formed a bond. Maria shared her disdain for Pepper and revealed that both she and Steve had abandoned their own children, similar to what was happening with Sarah. Maria provided me with invaluable insight. In summary, Maria and Steve recently completed their divorce proceedings as outlined in their custody agreement. Steve ended up with ownership of their shared car, bank account, and the majority of their savings, while his financial obligations for child support were notably reduced. Maria, however, prioritized her children's welfare over any financial gains. She chose to forfeit her financial advantages in exchange for maintaining control and ensuring the happiness of her children. Their custody arrangement contains stringent rules that Steve must follow, with significant repercussions for any breaches. These repercussions include selling their house and dividing the proceeds with Maria. Additionally, Steve's child support obligations would double, leading to his financial ruin. Interestingly, Steve has not blocked Maria on social media. He frequently sends messages boasting about his supposedly thriving life without her. Many of these messages even feature photos taken by Pepper. Maria and I compared our findings, shared our evidence, and formulated a plan together. Now it's time for retribution. I enlisted Jason's assistance, who promptly informed the FBI investigator about the hacking attempts I experienced. We suspected that the same individual was behind these incidents. The investigator swiftly contacted me, and I provided all the information I had gathered, expressing my suspicions about the culprit. The investigator then asked an intriguing question. Did I happen to know where Steve works? As it turned out, I already had that information, thanks to Maria. The FBI traced the hack involving Jason to a company where Steve was employed. After concluding my conversation with the FBI, I didn't waste any time. I contacted Steve's employer to file a complaint. I informed the manager about the ongoing hacking attempts on my account and strongly implicated Steve as the culprit. Initially, they didn't take it too seriously due to the lack of concrete evidence. However, they were in for a surprise when an agent paid them a visit the following week. It proved to be a nightmare for Steve. Pepper received divorce papers, and her lawyer was presented with all the evidence I had meticulously compiled. According to my lawyer, it was the most comprehensive investigation he had ever seen. I had solid evidence of 40 recorded tardies and 19 absences, all directly linked to Steve's late-night drinking outings. Maria even provided a photo taken at 2 a.m. on the night before my birthday. During an emergency hearing, evidence emerged of Steve and Pepper drinking at a tattoo parlor. Pepper arrived late and attributed her tardiness to her disability. Steve was notified that he had blatantly violated the entire custody agreement. Maria possessed photos proving his presence with Pepper on nights when the children were allegedly under his unsupervised care. Furthermore, she had evidence of unauthorized communication between Steve and Pepper, a direct violation of the custody agreement. The consequences were truly staggering. My complaint, coupled with the previous hack and the FBI's involvement, led to Steve's employer terminating his employment. Despite his attempts to evade legal consequences, his termination has left him unable to secure another position due to widespread awareness of the situation.